My name is Grace Reed. I'm 32 years old. And on the morning I was supposed to walk into my grandpa's will reading, a quiet old man who used to tend Walter's garden stepped in front of me, looked me dead in the eyes, and whispered 4 words that probably saved my life. Don't drink that coffee. I froze with the travel mug halfway to my lips. The steam was still rising, carrying that familiar hazelnut scent I loved. But something in his voice, steady, urgent, and full of sorrow, made my stomach drop. I lowered the cup slowly. He nodded once, then glanced toward my front porch where I'd left it for just a minute while I grabbed my keys. I didn't scream, I didn't panic. I simply set the mug down on the hood of my car, crouched beside it, and noticed the faint residue along the rim that didn't belong there. A slight discoloration. A chemical sharpness underneath the hazelnut. Someone had tampered with it, someone who knew exactly how I took my coffee every single morning. That someone was the woman who had adopted me 25 years earlier. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the families we're given sometimes become the ones we have to survive. If you're new here, I see you. Drop a comment and subscribe because this isn't just another inheritance story. This is the moment I realized the people who raised me were willing to end me for money they were already going to receive, and what I did next changed everything. Let me take you back to that morning in Knoxville, Tennessee. October air crisp, leaves just starting to turn gold along the driveway. I had dressed carefully, navy blouse, dark slacks, the silver locket Walter gave me resting against my collarbone like a quiet promise. The will reading was scheduled for 10. I thought I was walking into a room that would finally acknowledge I belonged. Instead, I nearly walked into my own funeral. If you've ever poured a drink from someone who was supposed to love you, and felt that tiny voice in the back of your mind whisper something feels off, you already understand the chill that ran through me. I stood there in my driveway, heart beating steady but loud, staring at that innocent-looking travel mug. 1 sip. That's all it might have taken. The old gardener, Mr. Ellis, had been watching from across the street. Walter had asked him years ago to keep an eye on me when he couldn't anymore. He told me later he saw my adoptive mother, Brenda, slip out of her car at dawn, move quickly onto my porch, and do something to the coffee I always left out to cool while I finished getting ready. She thought no one was looking. She was wrong. I didn't call the police right then. I didn't confront her. I simply thanked Mr. Ellis, poured the coffee down the storm drain, and felt something shift inside me. A cold, clear resolve. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was attempted murder, and it was happening on the same morning I was supposed to learn what Walter had left behind. You see, I grew up knowing I was the rescued child. My biological parents died in a fire when I was 6. The smell of smoke still visits me in dreams sometimes. The Callaways took me in a year later, Victor and Brenda, with their biological son Derek. On paper, they were heroes. In reality, I was the extra shadow in the family photos, the girl who never quite fit. But Walter, Victor's father, was different. He saw me, really saw me, and the people who saw me were exactly the ones they needed to remove before that will was read. I called a trusted private investigator I'd worked with before. I told him what happened. Within an hour, he had a plan. We staged everything so the Callaways would believe I was gone. Because I needed them relaxed. I needed them sitting in that lawyer's office thinking the problem named Grace had been handled. If you've ever had to earn your place in your own family, if you've ever smiled at the dinner table while feeling completely invisible, then you know why I didn't run. I stayed. I prepared. And 2 days later, when I walked into that while reading Alive and Breathing, my adoptive mother dropped to her knees. Not in relief, in pure ice-cold fear. Because she realized the daughter she tried to poison had been 3 steps ahead the entire time. This story is about what happens when the people who were supposed to protect you become the ones you have to protect yourself from. It's about chosen family, quiet strength, and the kind of justice that doesn't need to raise its voice. Stick with me, because the real story is just beginning. I should probably start at the beginning, even though the beginning still hurts to remember. My name is Grace Reed now, but for a long time I was just the foster kid. My biological parents died in a house fire when I was 6. I don't remember the flames, but I remember the social worker handing me a black trash bag for my clothes and telling me everything else was gone. The smell of smoke stayed in my hair for weeks, no matter how many times they washed it. That was the first time I learned how quickly home could disappear. A year later, the Callaways took me in, Victor and Brenda Callaway. They already had Derek, who was 4 at the time. They stood in the church on Adoption Day smiling for photos, telling everyone how God had led them to save a child. I was 7 years old, standing there in a dress that didn't fit quite right, trying to smile like I belonged. But belonging was never part of the deal. I had a room at the back of their ranch-style house in Knoxville. It was nice enough, clean sheets, a window that looked out on the backyard, but it was never really my room. The walls stayed the same pale beige they painted before I arrived. No posters, no pictures of me on the fridge like Derek's drawings. At family dinners, I sat at the end of the table, listening while they talked about Derek's soccer games, his school projects, his future. I was the quiet girl who did her homework without being asked and tried not to take up too much space. Brenda never raised her voice at me. She didn't need to, her silence was louder. She would organize family Christmas cards every year, beautiful professional photos of Victor, herself, and Derek smiling in matching sweaters. I was never in them. When relatives asked, she'd say, "Oh, Grace is camera shy," with that polite smile that never reached her eyes. Victor mostly ignored me unless he needed someone to run an errand or fix something on the computer. Derek treated me like furniture, there when he wanted an audience for his latest idea, invisible the rest of the time. The only person who made me feel seen was Walter, Victor's father. He lived in the house behind theirs in a small cottage attached to what used to be his auto repair shop. Walter was the kind of man who fixed things, not just cars. He fixed lawnmowers for neighbors, fixed broken fences, and somehow, he fixed the broken parts of me I didn't know how to name yet. I remember one evening when I was 10. I'd had a bad day at school, kids teasing me about being adopted, calling me the fire girl. I came home and sat on the back steps trying not to cry. Walter found me there. He didn't say much at first, just sat down beside me with his coffee and handed me a small wrench from his pocket. "Tools don't care where they came from, Gracie," he said quietly. "They only care what you do with them." That was the first real lesson he gave me, the difference between being wanted and being useful. The Callaways wanted the image of a saved child. Walter saw someone worth investing in. If you've ever grown up in a house where you had a roof and food but still felt homeless in your own family, you know exactly what I mean. I learned to be useful. I learned to be quiet. I learned to build my own world in the spaces they left empty. By the time I was 18, I had scholarships, online certifications, and a clear plan to get out. I moved into my first tiny apartment at 22. I built a career in cybersecurity from nothing. No family money, no safety net, just late nights and stubbornness. The Callaways and I existed in the same city like parallel roads that rarely crossed. Until Walter started getting sick. And everything began to unravel. I didn't know then that the family I tried so hard to earn my place in would one day try to erase me completely. But Walter knew. He saw it coming long before I did. And he left me the tools I would need to survive it. Walter Calloway became my real home long before I understood what home actually meant. He was 78 when I was 12, but he moved like a man who still had engines to fix and people to look after. Every afternoon after school, I'd slip out the back door of the Calloway house and walk the short path to his cottage. Brenda never stopped me. I think she was relieved I had somewhere else to be. Walter taught me how to change oil, how to read a wiring diagram, and most importantly, how to tell the difference between people who loved you and people who only needed you to look good in their story. One quiet evening, while we sat on his porch watching fireflies, he looked at me and said something I've never forgotten. "Gracie, there's a big difference between being wanted and being useful. The Callaways wanted the idea of a rescued daughter. I see a girl who's going to build something real." That sentence settled deep in my chest. It was the first time anyone had named the ache I carried. I wasn't angry at them anymore after that, I was just clear. He started teaching me things that would one day save me. Basic computer repair turned into coding tutorials on his old laptop. He bought me my first programming book, with money he probably couldn't spare. When I got my first certification at 19, he took me out for pancakes and told the waitress, "This is my granddaughter. She's smarter than all of us combined." I still smile when I remember the pride in his voice. One of the last clear days before his health really declined, Walter called me into his study. He placed two things on the wooden table between us. A delicate silver locket with a tiny photo of the two of us inside, and a worn leather journal. "The locket is so you never forget you're loved," he said, his voice a little shaky but strong. "The journal, that's where the truth goes. Write what you see, Gracie. People show you who they are. Believe them the first time." I wore that locket every important day after, and I filled those pages with observations I didn't fully understand yet, small withdrawals from his accounts, Brenda's sudden interest in his finances, the way Victor's dealership seemed to swallow money faster than it could earn it. If you've ever had one person in your life who made you feel truly seen, you know how powerful that is. Walter didn't just love me, he prepared me. Even when his body started failing 3 years ago, his mind stayed sharp. I was the one who set up his online banking, organized his medical records, and sat with him through long hospital nights. Not because I had to, because he was the only real parent I'd ever known. He signed a power of attorney naming me as his financial representative. Brenda smiled in public and seethed in private. I felt the tension growing, but I told myself it was just grief. I didn't want to believe the family I'd tried so hard to belong to would choose money over blood, or in my case, over the girl they once called their daughter. Walter passed 17 days before the will reading. I wound the silver locket around my fingers every morning after, feeling the weight of his trust against my skin. I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. The real storm was just beginning, and the people who were supposed to mourn him with me were already planning how to erase me from the picture entirely. But Walter had given me the tools, and I was finally ready to use them. By the time I turned 22, I had already moved out and never looked back. I found a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Knoxville. Nothing fancy, creaky floors and a kitchen window that only opened halfway, but it was mine. No more sitting at the edge of someone else's dinner table. No more pretending I didn't notice the family photos without me. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I built my career in cybersecurity the same way Walter fixed engines, one careful piece at a time. Scholarships, late-night online courses, freelance gigs fixing small business networks. I earned every certification myself. No calls home asking for help. No holiday dinners where I was the afterthought. I paid my own bills, bought my own groceries, and slowly turned that tiny apartment into a real home. But distance didn't erase the Callaways completely. We lived in the same city. Sometimes I'd run into Brenda at the grocery store. She'd give me that same polite smile and ask about my little job like I was still playing pretend. Victor would nod if he saw me, but his eyes always drifted somewhere else. Derek was still living at home, jumping from one failed business idea to the next. A sports bar that lasted 3 months, a flipping cars scheme that lost money on every deal. I kept my life separate, professional, quiet, until Walter's health started declining 3 years ago. That's when I stepped back in, not for them, but for him. I set up his laptop, taught him simple video calls so he could see my face when he felt lonely, organized his medications, and handled the growing stack of medical bills. Brenda acted like she was helping too, but I started noticing little things. Small withdrawals from Walter's checking account, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was just confusion from his medication, but the pattern was too consistent. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork. I documented everything quietly in the leather journal Walter had given me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that a family, even a broken one, wouldn't steal from a dying man. But Walter had taught me better. People show you who they are, Gracie. Believe them the first time. If you've ever watched someone you love slowly slip away while the people around them sharpen their knives, you know how heavy that silence feels. I carried it alone. I didn't confront anyone. Walter was in hospice by then, and the last thing I wanted was to turn his final weeks into a battlefield. So I waited. I loved him through it. I sat by his bed, held his hand, and listened to him talk about the old garage days. He gave me his silver locket one last time and made me promise to keep it close. 17 days after he passed, the will reading was scheduled. I thought it would be a quiet goodbye, a chance to honor the only person who ever chose me without conditions. I had no idea the Callaways had already decided I wasn't going to make it to that meeting. They had been draining Walter's accounts for years, over $200,000 funneled through careful, quiet channels. And now that he was gone, I was the only one standing between them and full control of what was left. I didn't know it yet, but they were willing to do whatever it took to remove me from the picture. Permanently. That's why, on the morning of the reading, someone tampered with my coffee. And that's when everything changed. The week after Walter's funeral, I sat alone at my kitchen table with his old leather journal open in front of me. The apartment was quiet except for the soft ticking of the silver locket against my chest. I had promised myself I would close out his financial affairs properly, reconcile every account, pay every final bill, make sure nothing was left hanging. That's when the pattern I had only half noticed finally became impossible to ignore. Every 2 weeks, on schedule like a dark heartbeat, money left Walter's primary checking account, sometimes $3,000, sometimes closer to $5,000. Always routed to an account under the name B. Prescott. I stared at the transactions until the numbers blurred. 78 withdrawals over 3 years. $247,000. My hands didn't shake. I simply opened a new encrypted folder on my laptop and started building a timeline. This wasn't emotion anymore, this was work. And in my line of work, you document everything before you act. B. Prescott turned out to be Brenda Prescott, her maiden name. The account had been opened at a different bank 18 months after Walter had given her limited access to help with his bills. From there, the money branched out in 3 neat directions. $140,000 went straight to Callaway Motors to keep Victor's failing dealership afloat. Another $47,000 paid off Derek's mounting credit cards and failed business debts. $60,000 became the down payment on a vacation cabin in Gatlinburg, titled solely in Brenda's name. They weren't just taking money, they were building a future on Walter's slow death. If you've ever discovered that the people who raised you see you as an obstacle instead of family, you know the strange calm that settles over you. Not rage, not tears. Just a cold, crystal-clear understanding. I sat there until the coffee I'd made went cold, reading and rereading the entries. Walter had trusted Brenda. He had trusted all of them. And they had repaid that trust by forging small pieces of his life away, while he sat in a wheelchair watching birds through the kitchen window. I didn't confront them. I didn't call the police yet. Walter was already gone, and I refused to let his final weeks be remembered as a war. Instead, I did what I do best. I became invisible again, but this time on my own terms. I screenshots every transaction, cross-referenced routing numbers, saved account statements, and backed everything up to a secure cloud with two-factor authentication. Professional habit from years of handling corporate breaches. You never know when the attacker will try to cover their tracks. That night I added a new section to the journal Walter gave me. I wrote about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to protect. I wrote about how love should never come with a price tag, and I made a quiet promise to the man who had believed in me. I would handle this, but I would do it the way he taught me, with patience, with proof, and without raising my voice. The will reading was scheduled for that Friday. I told myself I would present the financial discrepancies calmly to the lawyer and let the legal process begin. I had no idea the Callaways had already decided I wouldn't be there to say a word. They had moved from theft to something far darker. But in that moment, sitting alone with my laptop screen glowing in the dark apartment, I felt something shift inside me. The invisible daughter they had ignored for 25 years had just become the one person standing between them and everything they wanted. I closed the journal, touched the silver locket, and whispered to the empty room, "I see you now." And I started preparing. The morning of the will reading arrived quieter than I expected. I woke up at 6:30, the apartment still dark except for the soft glow of the streetlight outside my window. I went through my usual routine: shower, simple makeup, the navy blouse I knew Walter would have approved of. Before leaving, I set my travel mug on the front porch like always. Letting the hazelnut coffee cool just a little while, I gathered my keys and the folder containing Walter's final documents. The silver locket rested warm against my skin under the collar. I stepped outside, picked up the mug, and was halfway to my car when Mr. Ellis appeared. He had been Walter's gardener for over 20 years, a quiet, weathered man in his late 60s who moved with the careful grace of someone who understood plants and people equally well. He stepped out from behind the hedge across the street, his voice low but urgent. "Don't drink that coffee, Grace." I stopped mid-step, the mug suspended in my hand. The steam curled up gently, carrying that familiar sweet scent, but Mr. Ellis's eyes held something heavier than concern. He crossed the street slowly, his old flannel shirt hanging loose on his thin frame. "Brenda was here just before sunrise," he said. "She poured something into it from a small bottle. I saw it from my window. Walter asked me to watch over you after he was gone. I'm glad I listened." My heart didn't race. It simply grew very still. I lowered the mug and set it carefully on the hood of my car. Crouching down, I caught the faint chemical edge beneath the hazelnut, something sharp and unnatural. Not enough to kill instantly, perhaps, but enough to make me violently ill or worse during the drive to the lawyer's office. Enough to make me miss the will reading entirely. If you've ever stood in a moment where someone who was supposed to be family tried to harm you, you know the strange clarity that follows. Not panic, not even immediate anger. Just a deep, quiet understanding that the mask had finally come off. I thanked Mr. Ellis, poured the entire contents down the storm drain, and rinsed the mug thoroughly. He offered to stay nearby, but I told him I had this. Because in that moment, something inside me finished shifting. The girl who had spent years trying to earn their love was gone. The woman Walter had prepared was now fully awake. I called Nolan Webb, the private investigator I had worked with on corporate cases before. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything in calm, precise sentences. The tampering, the timing, the will reading in less than 4 hours. He didn't waste words. "Stay put, I'm coming. We staged this right, and they think you're out of the picture." Within the hour, Nolan arrived. We photographed the mug, took samples of the residue, and documented everything with time-stamped photos. Then we created the illusion they needed, a staged single-car accident on the route I would have taken. My car gently pushed into a ditch, door left open, belongings scattered just enough to look real. Local news picked it up quickly. Unidentified driver missing after early morning crash on Route 12. I watched from a safe distance as the story spread. Then I checked into a small motel under a different name, burner phone in hand, laptop open. I needed the Callaways to believe I was gone. Because only then would they lower their guard at the will reading. Sitting in that plain motel room, I held the silver locket and whispered to Walter. They tried to take me out before I could even walk through the door. If you've ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, you understand why I didn't cry. I simply opened my encrypted folder and kept building the case. The financial theft was already damning. Now we had attempted murder. 2 days, that's how long I gave myself to prepare. 2 days until I would walk into that lawyer's office alive, breathing, and completely ready. They thought they had removed the problem. They had no idea they had just woken up the one person who could destroy their entire carefully built lie. I spent the next 48 hours in that quiet motel room turning pain into preparation. Nolan Webb worked fast and clean. He's the kind of investigator who doesn't ask unnecessary questions and understands that sometimes justice needs to move in silence first. Within hours, he had secured the physical evidence from the coffee mug, lab samples sent discreetly to a trusted contact. We documented chain of custody like a corporate breach report, because that's what this had become, a betrayal I refused to let slide. From my laptop, I dove deeper into the financial trail I had started building weeks earlier. The shell account under B. Prescott wasn't just sloppy greed, it was calculated. Brenda had set it up carefully, routing money in small enough increments that Walter, in his declining health, might not notice. But I noticed. Every transfer, every destination, every lie it funded. $140,000 propped up Victor's failing dealership, the one he kept promising would turn around next quarter. $47,000 covered Derek's endless string of bad decisions and mounting debts. And $60,000 bought Brenda her private escape in Gatlinburg, a mountain cabin titled only in her name, far from the family she claimed to hold together. I cross-referenced everything against Walter's old records, the ones I had helped him organize. The forgery was subtle but clear once you knew where to look. Signatures that were close but not quite right, the loop on the W a little too tight, the slant of the C slightly off. Walter had taught me to spot details like that. Machines don't lie, Gracie, he used to say. Neither should people. If you've ever had to investigate the people who raised you, you know how surreal it feels. Every new piece of evidence landed like a quiet punch, but I didn't flinch. I kept typing, kept organizing, kept building a folder titled simply Call Away that grew heavier by the hour. Nolan added surveillance photos from the staged accident scene. The Calloway's house showed no panic, no rush to hospitals, no desperate calls. Just Brenda calmly making a single phone call, Victor sitting motionless at the dining table, and Derek slipping out with a black trash bag, probably evidence he wanted to dispose of. Later that afternoon, Nolan confirmed what we already suspected. Derek's truck had been caught on a neighbor's security camera near my apartment the night before. The timing lined up perfectly with the coffee tampering. They weren't just thieves, they were methodical. I sat on the edge of the motel bed that night, silver locket in my hands, and allowed myself one quiet moment of grief. Not for them, for the girl who once believed that if she was useful enough, quiet enough, good enough, they might one day see her as real family. That girl was gone now. In her place was someone Walter had prepared, calm, documented, and ready. I reached out to Margaret Holt, Walter's longtime attorney. She had known him for 30 years and had drawn up his final documents. When I explained what was happening, her voice stayed professional, but I heard the sadness underneath. She confirmed the power of attorney still gave me authority through probate. She also mentioned a sealed letter Walter had left, one that could only be opened if I was present at the reading. That was the final piece. Walter had known. He couldn't stop them himself, but he had armed me with everything I needed. I spent the second night refining the forensic report. 6 clear sections: timeline of theft, forged signatures, shell account details, physical tampering evidence, behavioral patterns after the accident, and Walter's own breadcrumbs. It read like the incident reports I wrote for corporate clients, cold, factual, undeniable. By the time the sun rose on the rescheduled will reading, I was ready. Not angry, not vengeful, just clear. I dressed in the same navy blouse, pinned the silver locket close to my heart, and looked at myself in the motel mirror. They tried to erase me, I whispered. Today I remind them I was never theirs to erase. If you've ever had to face the people who hurt you while carrying nothing but the truth and your own quiet strength, you understand the power in that kind of calm. I wasn't walking into a fight. I was walking into the moment. Everything they built on lies would finally come undone. The hours after we staged the accident passed in a kind of suspended silence. Nolan had parked discreetly across the street from the Calloway house with a telephoto lens. I stayed in the motel, refreshing local news and monitoring what I could through Walter's old family phone plan, the one still under his name that I had legitimate access to from handling his affairs. I wasn't spying on calls, I was simply watching timestamps and reactions. What I saw confirmed everything I had feared and more. When the local radio reported the single vehicle crash on Route 12 with the driver unaccounted for, the Calloway house didn't erupt into panic. No one called 911, no one rushed to the scene. No one phoned hospitals. Brenda stood at the kitchen window, phone to her ear, speaking calmly for a few minutes before sitting down at the table and folding her hands like a woman who had just checked off an item on her to-do list. Victor sat with his head in his palms, motionless for nearly 20 minutes. Derek disappeared into the garage, came out carrying a black trash bag, and drove off. He returned 40 minutes later without it. If you've ever watched the people who raised you react to news of your possible death with quiet relief instead of grief, you know how deeply that cuts. Not because I still wanted their love. I had stopped expecting that years ago, but because it proved how little I had ever mattered. At 11:47 a.m., Derek sent a 2-word text to Brenda. "It's handled." Brenda replied almost instantly, "Thank God. Now get to the lawyers. We can finally move forward." I stared at those messages on my screen until the words burned. My own adoptive brother texting my adoptive mother about my death the same way you'd text about picking up milk. No sorrow. No questions. Just efficiency. That moment crystallized something for me. They hadn't seen me as family for a long time. I was an obstacle. A loose end. The one person who had Walter's trust and the power of attorney that could expose them. With me gone, they believed the entire estate, the house, the remaining savings, the dealership, would fall neatly into their control. I sat on the motel bed and touched the silver locket. Walter's voice echoed in my mind. "People show you who they are, Gracie. Believe them the first time." I had believed them for years, quietly hoping I was wrong. Now the proof was in my hands. Nolan sent more photos throughout the afternoon. Brenda's face calm and composed. Victor looking broken but not surprised. Derek jittery, already moving on to the next task. Not one of them drove to the accident site. Not one of them called to check if I was alive. Their silence spoke louder than any confession. In that motel room, with the evidence folder growing thicker by the hour, I allowed myself to feel the weight of 25 years of being the invisible daughter. The girl who was never in the Christmas card. The girl who sat at the edge of the table. The girl they adopted for the image but never for the heart. But that girl had grown up. She had learned from the only person who truly saw her, and now she was ready to show them exactly who she had become. I closed my laptop for a moment and whispered to the empty room, "You wanted me gone, but I'm still here, and I see everything." The will reading had been postponed to the following morning. Margaret Holt had confirmed she would proceed only if I was present. I spent the rest of that day and night refining the report, making sure every piece of evidence was time-stamped, cross-referenced, and impossible to deny. By the time I lay down to sleep for a few restless hours, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was clear. Tomorrow I would walk into that room alive. Tomorrow they would discover that the daughter they tried to erase had been quietly holding all their secrets in her hands. And the truth, once spoken, would never let them hide again. The night before the rescheduled will reading, the motel room felt smaller than it was. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off, only the glow of my laptop screen cutting through the darkness. The silver locket rested heavy against my chest, and Walter's leather journal lay open beside me. I wasn't crying. I wasn't pacing. I was simply doing what I had been trained to do my whole life. Prepare quietly while everyone else assumed I was gone. Margaret Holt had been incredibly supportive when I finally spoke with her. She confirmed that Walter had changed the executor of his will from Victor to me 2 months before he passed. He had also left a sealed personal letter with strict instructions. It could only be opened if I was physically present. That single detail told me everything. Walter had seen the betrayal coming. He couldn't fight it from his wheelchair, but he made sure I would have the authority and the truth when the time came. I spent hours refining the forensic report. 6 clean sections, written in the same professional tone I used for corporate clients. Executive summary. Financial timeline showing every transfer to the B. Prescott account. Side-by-side comparisons of forged signatures on withdrawal slips and loan documents. Physical evidence from the coffee tampering, lab results, timestamps, Mr. Ellis's witness statement. Surveillance photos and text messages showing the family's calm reaction to my accident. And finally, Walter's own documented breadcrumbs. If you've ever had to build a case against the only family you've ever known, you understand how lonely that work feels. Every new line of evidence was another quiet goodbye to the version of them I had once hoped existed, but I kept going. Because Walter had taught me that the truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be undeniable. Nolan checked in regularly. He confirmed the coffee had contained a sedative mixed with something far more dangerous, enough to cause a serious medical emergency on the road. Combined with the financial fraud, we now had both attempted murder and elder financial exploitation. Detective Clara Sims, someone I had worked with before on a corporate case, reviewed the file discreetly. She told me the evidence was strong enough for warrants, but she would wait for my signal at the lawyer's office. Timing was everything. I allowed myself one small moment of reflection as the clock passed midnight. I thought about all the years I had tried to earn my place at that table. The quiet dinners where I smiled and stayed small. The holidays where I watched them take family photos without me, the way Brenda would remind me in that soft, cutting voice that I was lucky they had taken me in at all. Those days were over. I closed the laptop, held the silver locket in both hands, and whispered the promise I had made to Walter's memory. I will finish what you started. The next morning I dressed carefully, the same navy blouse, dark slacks, hair pulled back neatly, professional armor. I packed the briefcase with the report, the photographs, the journal pages, and every piece of evidence arranged in perfect order. Mr. Ellis met me in the motel parking lot. He had shaved and was wearing an old jacket of Walter's that I had given him. He looked at me with steady eyes and simply said, "Walter would be proud." We drove to Margaret's office in Nolan's car, three people who had nothing to gain except doing what was right. The pocket watch-like rhythm of the locket against my heart kept me grounded. No fear. Just clarity. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw their cars already there. Brenda's silver SUV, Derek's black pickup, Victor's gray sedan. They had come expecting to divide Walter's estate without me standing in the way. I took one deep breath, touched the locket, and stepped out of the car. If you've ever walked into a room knowing you were about to shatter the world of people who once held power over you, you know the quiet power in that moment. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for the truth Walter had trusted me to deliver. And I was ready. We arrived at Margaret Holt's office on Gay Street just before 10. The old brick building felt heavier that morning, its narrow staircase echoing every footstep like a heartbeat. Nolan and Mr. Ellis waited downstairs in the lobby. I climbed the stairs alone, briefcase in hand, silver locket resting steady against my heart. I didn't knock. I simply opened the conference room door and stepped inside. The room went completely still. Brenda was checking her phone, legs crossed, trying to look composed. The moment she saw me, the phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. Her face drained of color, lips parting in silent shock. Victor's hand jerked, knocking over his coffee cup. Brown liquid spread slowly across the polished wood, but he didn't move to clean it. He just stared, eyes wide with disbelief. Derek froze mid-bounce in his chair, mouth open, no sound coming out. Margaret sat at the head of the table, calm and professional, but I caught the faint relief in her eyes when she saw me. I closed the door behind me with a soft click that seemed to echo forever. Then I walked to the empty chair beside Margaret, set my briefcase down, and sat as if this were any other meeting. "Good morning," I said quietly, my voice steady. "Please proceed with the reading." No one asked if I was okay. No one mentioned the accident. Not Victor, who was supposed to be my father. Not Brenda, who had signed my adoption papers. Not Derek, who had grown up in the same house with me. Their silence said everything they couldn't. If you've ever walked into a room full of people who believed you were dead and watched their faces crumble, you understand the strange power of that moment. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to finish what Walter started. Margaret began reading the will in her clear, measured voice. Walter's estate, the West Knoxville house, remaining savings, life insurance, and residual assets from the old garage totaled approximately $555,000 after debts. It was to be divided equally 3 ways: Victor, Derek, and me, each share around $185,000. I watched their reactions carefully. Brenda's shoulders dropped slightly in visible relief. Victor's fists unclenched. Derek blinked rapidly at the ceiling, trying to hide his exhale. They had expected to be cut out completely. Brenda had spent years telling them Walter would leave everything to the stray. So they had tried to remove me. And now they were discovering they would have received their shares anyway, if they had simply waited. The irony tasted metallic on my tongue. Margaret set the will aside and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "There is one additional item," she said. "Walter left a personal letter. His instructions were clear. It can only be read if Grace is present." Brenda's relief vanished instantly. She glanced at Victor, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Margaret broke the seal and began reading Walter's shaky but determined handwriting aloud. The room held its breath. And I knew the first strike was about to land. Margaret's voice filled the quiet room as she read Walter's letter. His words were simple but heavy, like everything he had ever taught me. "If you're hearing this, it means Gracie is here. I'm glad. I watched my money disappear for years. I stayed quiet, hoping someone would come clean. No one did. I was wrong about 3 of you. I was right about 1. Gracie, you're the executor now because you're the only one I trust to do what's right." The air in the room felt thick. Brenda's jaw tightened. Victor stared at the table. Derek shifted uncomfortably. I opened my briefcase slowly, pulled out the thick forensic report, and placed it in the center of the table. "Grandpa was right," I said calmly, "and I have the proof." I walked them through it the way I would present a security breach to a boardroom, clear, factual, and impossible to dismiss. I started with the financial timeline. 78 unauthorized transfers over 3 years. $247,000 moved from Walter's checking account to a shell account in Brenda's maiden name, B. Prescott. I slid printed statements across the table. From there, I continued, the money went to 3 places: $140,000 to Callaway Motors to cover Victor's debts, $47,000 to Derek's credit cards and failed businesses, $60,000 as the down payment on a Gatlinburg cabin, titled only in Brenda's name. Brenda's face flushed. That's ridiculous. Walter gave me access to help with his bills. I was managing things. Managing doesn't require a secret account in your maiden name, I replied evenly. And I'm the executor now. Those accounts belong to the estate. I placed the next set of documents down. Side-by-side signature comparisons. Walter's authentic signature from the power of attorney. Then the forged ones on the large withdrawal slips and the loan consent form that used Walter's house as collateral for Victor's dealership debt. The loops on the W are too narrow. The C is cramped. Walter didn't sign these. Someone practiced until they were close enough to fool a tired old man in a wheelchair. Victor's hands started trembling. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. Derek tried to deflect. I didn't touch any money. I don't know about any of that. I looked at him directly. No, you did something else. I laid out the photos of the travel mug with the chemical residue, the lab report, Mr. Ellis's sworn statement. Then the neighbor's security footage showing Derek's truck near my apartment early that morning. You tampered with my coffee. The same way you thought you could remove me from this reading. Brenda stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly. You have no right to accuse us. You were never really family. We took you in when no one else would. I stayed seated, voice calm. You're right about one thing, Brenda. I was never truly yours. I was Walter's, and he trusted me with the truth. If you've ever had someone who was supposed to love you look you in the eyes and say you were never family, you know how freeing it can feel when you finally believe them. In that moment, their words had no power over me anymore. I continued presenting the evidence, text messages, surveillance photos showing their calm reaction to the staged accident. The complete lack of any attempt to find me. Every piece built on the last, painting a picture that was undeniable. Victor finally spoke, his voice cracking. Grace, I knew about the money. I knew what Brenda was doing, but I didn't know about the coffee. I swear I would never. You knew enough, I said quietly. You forged the loan documents, you let them drain a dying man's accounts to save your failing business, and when I became a threat, you looked the other way. The room was silent except for the faint ticking I imagined from the locket against my chest, Walter's steady heartbeat still guiding me. Brenda's mask had completely cracked. Her voice rose, sharp and desperate. This is our family's money. 30 years I gave to this family, and you were just the stray we felt sorry for. I touched the locket briefly, then looked at all 3 of them. You tried to kill me over money you were already going to receive, equal shares. That's what Walter wanted. But you couldn't wait, you couldn't trust, and now everything you built on lies is coming apart. I turned to Margaret. I'm exercising my authority as executor. The stolen funds will be recovered, the forgeries will be voided, and the criminal matters. I picked up my phone and sent the single word to Detective Clara Sims. Now. Footsteps sounded on the stairs outside, heavy, purposeful. Brenda's eyes widened in real fear for the first time. The truth had finally caught up to them. The footsteps on the stairs grew louder. 2 uniformed officers and Detective Clara Sims stepped through the door with quiet authority. The conference room, already heavy with tension, seemed to shrink around us. Clara's voice was calm and professional as she began the arrests. Derek Callaway, you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy. She read him his rights clearly while one officer moved forward. Derek's face went pale. He lunged backward in his chair, not toward the door, but toward the wall like a cornered animal. His knees buckled and he slid down to the carpet, hands on his head, whispering, Mom, you said there weren't cameras. Brenda snapped at him instinctively. I told you to use cash. She stopped mid-sentence, realizing too late what she had admitted. The room fell into a stunned silence. Clara continued without pause. Brenda Callaway, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and elder financial exploitation. Brenda stood rigid, chin lifted in one last attempt at defiance as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Her eyes burned into mine. You'll regret this, Grace. You'll be completely alone. No one will want you. I remained seated, hands folded on the table, voice steady. I was alone the day you reminded me I was never family. I built my life anyway. Victor was not arrested that day, but Clara informed him that the district attorney would be in contact regarding the financial fraud and forgery charges. He nodded once, face ashen, looking like a man who had just watched his entire world burn down. He gathered his coat and left the room without looking at anyone, shoulders slumped. As the officers led Brenda down the hallway toward the stairs, she passed Mr. Ellis standing quietly in the lobby. She stopped for a second, recognition flashing across her face.
"You," she hissed, "the gardener. You ruined everything."
Mr. Ellis looked at her with the quiet dignity Walter had always shown. "No, Mom, you did that yourself." The door closed behind them. The heavy click echoed like a final period at the end of a very long, painful chapter. If you've ever watched the people who hurt you finally face the consequences of their choices, you know it doesn't feel like victory in the Hollywood way. It feels like a heavy door finally closing. Relief mixed with sadness for what could have been, but mostly relief. Margaret sat quietly at the head of the table, giving me space. Nolan remained by the door, a silent guardian. I took a slow breath and reached into my blazer pocket, pulling out the silver locket. I held it for a moment, feeling Walter's presence stronger than ever. The legal process moved forward steadily after that. Brenda was denied bail due to the severity of the charges and flight risk. Derek's bail was set high at $500,000, money they no longer had. Victor chose to cooperate, providing additional details in exchange for a plea deal, supervised probation, full restitution, and forfeiture of his inheritance share. The stolen $247,000 would be recovered through the sale of the Gatlinburg cabin and liquidation of Callaway Motors' assets. The forged loan on Walter's house was voided. The house itself, along with my rightful share, became mine to honor Walter's wishes. In that conference room, with the chaos finally settling, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped carrying the weight of trying to belong to people who never wanted me. Walter's trust had been proven right, and the daughter he believed in had done exactly what he asked, what was right. The weeks that followed moved like a quiet river finding its new course. Brenda and Derek faced the full weight of their charges. The evidence was overwhelming and the court process, while slow, was thorough. Victor's cooperation helped close the financial side cleanly. The Gatlinburg cabin sold quickly, and the proceeds, along with the dealership assets, returned to Walter's estate. The forged loan was voided, clearing the title on the West Knoxville house. As executor, I distributed everything according to Walter's true wishes. My 1/3 share gave me stability I had never asked for. Victor's forfeited portion went to the community programs Walter had quietly supported for decades. The vocational training center where he once taught young mechanics, and the after-school program at the local library. It felt right. Walter's generosity continued through me. I offered Mr. Ellis a permanent position maintaining the property. He accepted with tears in his eyes. The small apartment above the old garage became his first real home in years. He still wears Walter's old jacket when he works in the yard. Sometimes I catch him talking to the flowers like Walter used to do. I turned the main house into a quiet home and small cybersecurity consulting office. The sign by the garage is simple: honest work, honest protection. Clients come through Nolan's network. Business is steady, meaningful. No more proving I belong, just doing what I was meant to do. 2 months later, I sat at Walter's old kitchen table one early Saturday morning, the same table where he taught me to trust my own eyes and heart. Sunlight filtered through the window above the sink, the one he used to watch Cardinals from. My laptop was open with a new client project. Coffee steamed in his favorite chipped mug. The silver locket rested on the table beside me, catching the light. Mr. Ellis was outside mending the back fence, whistling an old tune Walter used to hum. The house smelled of fresh coffee and sawdust. Life, not memories of betrayal. I picked up the locket, held it warm in my palm, and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa, it's handled." If you've ever had to rebuild your sense of family after the ones you were given tried to break you, you know healing doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives in small, steady moments: a quiet morning, a trusted friend working in the yard, the ability to breathe without carrying old wounds. I didn't just inherit a house. I inherited the freedom to stop proving my worth. Walter had shown me the difference between being wanted and being useful. In the end, I learned I could be both, but only for people who chose me back. Family isn't the name on adoption papers or the blood in your veins. It's the gardener who watched over you because a dying man asked. It's the attorney who protected a letter for months. It's the grandfather who believed in you even when he couldn't stand. And sometimes it's the woman who finally chooses herself after years of trying to earn a place at the wrong table. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, know this: you are not alone. You are allowed to build your own table. You are allowed to walk away from people who only want to use you. And when you do, the right ones, the real ones, will find their way to you. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it touched something in you, type healing in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're not the stray, they're the strong one. And remember, the people who truly love you will never make you earn your place. I'm Grace Reed. I survived the family I was given and built the one I deserve. For the first time in my life, I finally feel home.